November 2011. A 20-year-old woman house-sitting for relatives. A brutal execution-style murder. And DNA evidence that pointed to an unknown male suspect. So why did police arrest her boyfriend the same day they found her body? This is the story of how tunnel vision, a coerced confession, and dismissed forensic evidence sent an innocent man to prison for murder, while the real killer walked free for over a decade. Andrea Eilber was supposed to be safe. The 20-year-old was house-sitting at a relative's home in Mayfield Township, Lapeer County, Michigan in November 2011. When she stopped responding to calls and messages, her family grew concerned. They launched a search. First, they found her abandoned vehicle on a nearby road. Then came the horrifying discovery. Authorities entered the residence and found Andrea's body in the basement. She had been bound to a chair and shot in the head, an execution-style killing that suggested premeditation, not a crime of passion. Forensic investigators documented the scene and collected evidence. Among the items recovered was a cigarette butt. When tested in 2011, it yielded a single male DNA profile. Here's what should have changed everything. That DNA profile did not match anyone connected to the case. Not Andrea's boyfriend, not any known associate. An unknown male had been at that crime scene. Despite this exculpatory evidence, investigators immediately focused on Kenneth K.C. Grondin, Andrea's boyfriend. The intensity of this tunnel vision is shocking. Grondin was arrested and charged with murder on the very day Andrea's body was discovered. Think about that timeline. On the same day investigators found DNA evidence excluding the boyfriend, they arrested him anyway. Why? Because he fit a familiar narrative. The boyfriend, the domestic tragedy, an easily understood motive, even if it was completely unproven. This pervasive bias, what experts call tunnel vision, allowed law enforcement to dismiss the critical gaps staring them in the face. There was no physical evidence linking Grondin to the crime. No DNA. No fingerprints. No connection to the murder weapon or binding materials. And that unknown male DNA? It would be explained away, minimized, dismissed as contamination or an irrelevant visitor. The narrative had been set. Now they just needed a confession. What happened next is a textbook example of how innocent people end up confessing to crimes they didn't commit. K.C. Grondin was subjected to an extended interrogation, the kind that research shows produces false confessions. Statistics reveal that individuals who falsely confess are interrogated for an average of up to 16 hours before they break. The tactics are well documented. Intimidation, isolation, deceptive claims about evidence, and the relentless psychological pressure of prolonged questioning. Grondin's confession fit what experts call a coerced compliant, false confession. The suspect knows they're innocent but confesses anyway, simply to escape the immediate threat of the interrogation room, or because they've been promised leniency if they just admit to the crime. The confession became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Never mind the DNA evidence pointing elsewhere. Never mind the complete absence of physical corroboration. But here's where the system should have caught this error and didn't. The trial court failed to adequately examine whether Grondin's confession was voluntary. They didn't determine crucial facts. Was he separated from his mother during questioning? Was he denied food, sleep, or medical attention? What was the totality of circumstances surrounding that interrogation? These weren't minor oversights. These were constitutional questions that should have been rigorously examined before allowing a confession to be used as evidence. The failure of judicial scrutiny at this stage meant that correcting the error would require years of costly appellate battles. In 2014, after a 12-day jury trial, Kenneth Grondin was convicted of murder. The verdict rested almost entirely on that disputed confession. There was an inferred motive based on his relationship with Andrea. But there was no physical evidence connecting him to this execution-style killing. And that DNA evidence? The prosecution successfully convinced the jury to dismiss it. Maybe it was contamination. Maybe just someone who had visited the house. Irrelevant, they argued. This reveals a disturbing truth about how juries process evidence. They often assign overwhelming weight to confessions, even when confronted with complex scientific evidence pointing elsewhere. A direct confession feels like definitive proof. DNA profiles and forensic arguments feel abstract, easy to explain away. So the jury made their choice. They believed the confession. They dismissed the science. The appeals process that followed was protracted and painful. In 2015, the Michigan Court of Appeals sent the case back to the trial court, ordering them to finally do what they should have done in the first place. Properly analyze whether Grondin's confession was voluntary based on the totality of circumstances. Finally, in 2018, 7 years after Andrea's murder, the Court of Appeals vacated Grondin's conviction entirely. But here's the crucial detail. They vacated it on procedural grounds. The jury verdict form had been improperly constructed, limiting the jury's ability to consider lesser charges. The confession's voluntariness remained problematic. This was justice by technicality. The conviction was deemed legally unsound, but K.C. Grondin hadn't been proven innocent. He faced the prospect of a retrial, where that same prejudicial confession could be used against him again. The real killer remained unknown. Following the 2018 reversal, Grondin's retrial was scheduled. But then the proceedings stalled. The Michigan State Police began exploring something new, retesting the forensic evidence using advanced technology that hadn't existed in 2011. In 2022, 11 years after Andrea's murder, investigators submitted that preserved cigarette but to Othram's laboratory. Othram scientists employed forensic-grade genome sequencing, a technique capable of developing comprehensive DNA profiles from samples too small or degraded for older methods. This was the technological leap that changed everything. The resulting profile was used in a forensic genetic genealogy search. Investigators uploaded it to genetic databases, found distant familial matches, and built a family tree. Through extensive genealogical research, they narrowed down the identity of that unknown male whose DNA had been sitting in evidence for over a decade. The DNA belonged to Chadwick Shane Mobley, a former Michigan resident who had since moved to Utah. This was the 16th case in Michigan solved using this innovative technology. The same technology that had finally caught the Golden State Killer. The same technology that was revolutionizing cold case investigations across the country. When Michigan State Police contacted Mobley about the 2011 homicide, he fled. He ran from Utah and was eventually apprehended by authorities in Montana. His flight became powerful circumstantial evidence, reinforcing what the DNA had already proven. This was Andrea Eilber's killer. In February 2025, Chadwick Mobley stood in Lapeer County's 40th Circuit Court and pleaded no contest to first-degree murder, and felony firearm. In April 2025, nearly 14 years after Andrea's death, Mobley was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel praised the collaborative efforts that finally secured justice for Andrea Eilber. But consider what this means. For over a decade, the real killer had been free. Free because investigators had locked onto the wrong narrative and ignored the one piece of objective evidence that could have redirected their investigation from day one. Kenneth Grondin spent years incarcerated for a crime he didn't commit. Even after his conviction was vacated in 2018, he lived under the shadow of a potential retrial.
No closure, no exoneration.
Just legal limbo and the stigma of having been convicted of murdering his girlfriend. The psychological toll of wrongful conviction is devastating. Research shows exonerees suffer from high rates of PTSD, severe depression, and difficulty reintegrating into society. Grondin lost years of his life, his liberty, his dignity, and those developmental years can never be returned. True exoneration only came when the scientific evidence definitively identified Mobley and charges were finally dropped. For Andrea Eilber's family, the trauma was layered and prolonged. First came the devastating loss of their daughter in 2011. Then, they believed justice had been served when Grondin was convicted. They had closure, or so they thought. When his conviction was overturned in 2018, that closure was shattered. They were plunged back into uncertainty. Was their daughter's killer free? Had they been wrong to believe in Grondin's guilt? They endured years of renewed waiting, of legal maneuvering, of not knowing, until Mobley's plea and sentencing in 2025 finally provided definitive answers. For Lapeer County, This case represented a profound crisis of confidence. Their law enforcement had relied on a flawed investigation. Their judicial system had failed to catch constitutional violations. An innocent man had been condemned while the true killer remained free for over a decade. How do you restore trust after that? The ease with which the angry boyfriend narrative prevailed over objective scientific evidence reveals something troubling about our justice system. We often prefer simple, emotionally satisfying explanations over complex, scientific truth. Let's be clear about what failed in this case. First, investigative tunnel vision. Police locked onto the boyfriend narrative so quickly that they arrested him the same day they found DNA evidence excluding him. They never seriously pursued the unknown male whose DNA was at the crime scene. Second, coercive interrogation. Grandin's confession was obtained under circumstances so questionable that appellate courts couldn't affirm its voluntariness. Yet it became the centerpiece of a murder conviction. Third, judicial failure. The trial court didn't perform adequate constitutional review of the interrogation. They didn't rigorously examine whether the confession was voluntary before allowing it to sway a jury. Fourth, dismissal of forensic evidence. That DNA profile, the one objective piece of evidence, was successfully neutralized by the prosecution. Explained away. Deemed irrelevant. Only technology, forensic genetic genealogy that didn't exist in 2011, finally corrected what human judgment had gotten catastrophically wrong. This case makes clear what reforms are urgently needed. Mandatory electronic recording of all custodial interrogations. Complete video and audio documentation provides transparency. It creates an objective record of duration, environment, and tactics used. It allows judges to accurately determine voluntariness. It prevents exactly the kind of disputed circumstances that plagued Grandin's case. Enhanced scrutiny of confession evidence. Courts must hold robust pretrial reliability hearings for confessions. They must allow false confession experts to testify. These measures counteract the overwhelming weight juries assign to confessions, even coerced ones. Universal evidence preservation. States must mandate permanent preservation of biological evidence in all violent felony cases. And they must establish clear protocols for post-conviction retesting using advanced technologies like forensic genetic genealogy. Judicial training on forensic science. Judges and legal practitioners need specialized education to understand the limitations and reliability of forensic evidence. This prevents exculpatory findings from being easily dismissed during trial. Responsive post-conviction review mechanisms. The delay between Andrea's murder in 2011 and Mobley's sentencing in 2025 was 14 years. States need modern rules allowing motions for new trials based on newly discovered scientific evidence, at any time. Here's the hard reality. The financial and moral cost of correcting this wrongful conviction far exceeded what it would have cost to implement proper safeguards in the first place. Mandatory interrogation recording. Rigorous judicial review. Proper pursuit of forensic leads. These aren't expensive reforms. They're basic quality control measures. K.C. Grandin lost years of his life. Andrea Eilber's family suffered prolonged, compounded trauma. The real killer remained free for over a decade. Public trust in the justice system was shattered. All of this was preventable. The Andrea Eilber case is a stark reminder that justice delayed is justice denied, and that our system's faith in confessions can override even the most objective scientific evidence. It took 14 years and a technological breakthrough to correct what should never have happened in the first place. The question is, how many more K.C. Grandins are sitting in prison right now, waiting for technology to catch up to what the evidence has been saying all along? If you found this case as troubling as I did, please like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments. What reforms do you think are most urgent to prevent wrongful convictions?